Story 1. First off, I am so glad I finally found a place to share all my weird, strange, and totally crazy stories. I love it here. Okay, so on to the story. I live in a mobile home on property that has been passed down for generations. It belonged to my great-grandma, my grandma, and now my mama. So, if something were to happen to my mama, the land would go to my brother and me. Since he already has a house with one of my favorite sisters-in-law, the land and house would belong to me. One day, my parents and I were talking, and I mentioned how I was craving some peaches. I usually get them in a jar filled with sweet juice yum. Mama said she had been wanting to get some peach trees for a while, so I got all excited and went to a cooperative store. If you don't know what that is, it's a place where you can get gardening tools, seeds, trees, plants, fishing gear, etc. It's like a mall for country folks. I went to the store, found the peach trees, called Mama, gave her the price, and told her there were some plum trees available as well. So, I bought one plum tree and one peach tree, along with plant food, bricks, and other items to decorate around them. When I got home, my dad asked if I could plant the trees because he had to take a family friend to therapy. I was fine with that. I grew up being a tomboy, so I know what I'm doing. I came out of the house in my messy clothes, gloves, and everything else I needed. I had already laid out the stuff in the yard and knew where I was going to plant the trees. But something in my gut and spirit was throwing me off. Have you ever had the feeling that you were being watched? Yeah, I had that feeling. I looked up and saw a white car driving by very slowly. Okay, so what's not about to happen is me getting kidnapped in broad daylight. No way, no how. Not today. As a woman, I know how to take care of myself. I went into the house, grabbed my knife that I keep for protection, and stuck it in my pocket. I should note that there are two entrances to our yard that are connected. It's like you come in one entrance and can go out the other. I came back outside, and the same car came back, pulling into our yard and going out the other way. Now I was really creeped out. So, I grabbed my phone and put 911 on speed dial. I've lived in this neighborhood my whole life, but I'm a homebody and don't go out much. After putting the phone on speed dial, I set it right next to me on my small table and started digging holes for the trees. As soon as I finished digging, I grabbed the plant food and the trees, fixed them up nice and straight, and covered them with dirt. Then it was time to decorate my favorite part. I grabbed my bricks and everything else, and not even 5 minutes after I started, the same car was driving by again. But this time, it came in through the second entrance, pulled all the way into the yard, and stopped. A tall, lanky guy stepped out and asked, "How much?" I was confused and asked. "How much for what?" he replied. "How much do you charge to do this?" "I like the work you did. I'm looking for someone to do a job like this." I told him, "I'm sorry, sir, but I don't do this for work. I'm just planting in the yard." He gave me a side eye and said, "How do you not do this for work? Clearly, the owner of this house paid you to do it. Just give me an estimate. A man like you can do the work." Okay, I know I'm a tomboy, but how on earth do you mistake a woman with big curves for a man? I looked at him, irritated, and said, "I am not a man. I don't do this for work. This is my house, and you are trespassing. Did you not see the no trespassing sign on the tree by the entrance? It's a big black sign with bold red letters." He got an attitude and said, "Look, I just want an estimate. It's not that hard to do. Just come up with a price to do the yard work." At this point, I was furious. I remembered I had my phone already on speed dial, so I told him to either leave willingly or I would call the police. I had already pressed the dial button. This guy actually stood there for a second, then completely stepped out of the car and stood next to it, saying, "No." He insisted that someone was going to hear about how I, whom he still thought was a man, wouldn't give him service. He even asked where my van or truck with the company name was. My level of anger was skyrocketing. I gave the 911 operator my address, and when he made that comment, I shouted, "Get off my property. I told you this is my house, and I'm not a man. But if you don't leave, you're about to get treated like I am one." I had my other hand in my pocket, with my finger on the button of my knife in case he tried something. The whole time, he was still standing there, arguing with me. A few minutes later, the police arrived, and it just so happened to be an officer I had known since I was a kid. He was my big brother's boss when my brother was a policeman. He knew my mama and daddy too. I was so happy to see him. As soon as he stepped out and asked what happened, I couldn't get a word in before this maniac went off about how I, an employee of a gardening company, cursed at him true, threatened him also true, and assaulted him false. The officer looked at me, then at the house, and back at me, asking, "Baby girl, is that you?" I took off my garden hat, revealing my high afro puff, put my glasses on, and said, "Yep, it's me, officer." The guy's jaw dropped, and he looked me up and down. The officer said, "This is a woman, sir. She lives here in this house. I know her and her family very well. She doesn't work for a gardening company. She and her parents just like to garden in their yard. You've been warned to leave this property because it is private, and you refused, so now I have to arrest you. You're lucky she didn't actually assault you like you claim because, for one, with this being their property, they have a right to defend themselves if you're still on it. And two, this girl grew up watching wrestling and wrestled with my boys. She'd probably kick your behind. Okay, hands behind your back. I'll call a tow company to pick up your car." Meanwhile, I was just standing there with a big grin on my face. When the officer was leaving, my dad pulled up and asked what happened. I told him the whole story, and he pressed charges because the guy was on our property. Oh, and now we have fresh peaches and plums that are so sweet. They've given me sugar bumps, little tiny bumps that come up from eating something extremely sweet and are very itchy. For those wondering, I am not diabetic. I get tested every month. Why does my phone keep trying to say money instead of month? Must be another stimulus check coming. I have even switched doctors and still don't have diabetes. My doctor told me that my case of sugar bumps is not severe because I stopped eating sweets like I used to as a child. I don't eat them all day, every day. I drink my water, eat my veggies, and everything else. I usually only indulge in sweets on the weekends, but now I only do it if I have a test for it. And on Friday, July 24th, I'm getting me a cheesecake and chowing down because I have a taste for it. Story 2. I'll start by explaining briefly that we've just moved to the area where we're living now. I'm extremely new here, and it makes me a little more nervous than usual. I am legally deaf. That doesn't mean I can't hear anything at all, but you definitely have to speak slowly and very loudly, especially with this pandemic and these masks. I can lip read really well, but with the masks, I'm at a loss, unfortunately. I was wandering around the local Walmart, dressed in a bright yellow shirt, a pair of yoga pants, and wearing my Department of Transportation approved motorcycle helmet with the visor down instead of a mask. Masks are mandatory. They never seem to mind letting me in as long as I keep my visor down while I shop, but it makes me even more deaf than usual. My helmet is bright white, not hard to tell I don't work there. There is no mistaking that I don't work at Walmart. I have my hearing aids in, but they tend to have a wide V effect with 3 separate microphones, so I don't hear people behind me very well, if at all. The hearing aids mute background noise so I can focus on what's in front of me. Even with them, I have serious difficulty hearing people when my helmet is on. I clearly had a few items in my hands, sandwich meats and bread, and I was following the arrows they had put down. I was squatting down, looking for a can of Campbell's mushroom soup, when suddenly there was a very aggressive repeated smack against my shoulder. I actually screamed because I hadn't seen her come up behind me and was not expecting anyone during this pandemic to be close enough to actually touch me. She scared the absolute daylights out of me. I twisted and landed hard on my butt, partially landing on and squishing my bread. I could suddenly see this woman, and she was wearing her mask, gesturing wildly. I could hear the murmur of her voice, but with the visor down and my helmet on, I couldn't understand her properly. My hearing aids were pressed against the sides of the padding of my helmet and were moderately useless with the visor down. She didn't react to the fact that I had fallen, just continued gesturing wildly, and her voice was rising. I finally made out what I thought was, "Hair is the mat fuel." It's strange how your brain fills in blanks when you can't hear someone or read their lips. I just shook my head and said, "I don't know." I knew my response was muffled by my helmet because she kept at it. While still on the ground, I signed wildly, "I don't know, I don't know," all the while shrugging my shoulders and shaking my head hard. Unfortunately, to her, it might have looked like I was saluting her. She then yelled, "Where is the cat food?" There was a man behind her, wearing a mask, who was socially distancing until she raised her voice. I saw him approach quickly. He didn't work there either, and I could hear him literally yell at her. "Hey lady, don't touch her. What's wrong with you?" This attracted the attention of nearby people, and thankfully, 2 employees who actually worked there. I saw their blue shirts coming, and I just scooted back from the lady as she turned away from me and started bickering with the man. I couldn't hear most of it, but I could definitely see it escalating. I stood up, stepped back further, and brushed myself off. I picked up my sandwich meats, but the bread was a lost cause. One employee clearly tried to de-escalate the situation, and she was just shrill and gesturing madly. I could no longer hear the man. He wasn't raising his voice anymore. One of the staff members standing beside me seemed to ask if I was okay. I shrugged and threw off a few signs. "I'm deaf, sorry. Don't know her." I pointed aggressively at the lady who had scared me. The man was explaining everything that had happened to the other staff member. The second employee seemed to understand that I was deaf and just nodded. She motioned for me to step back further from the argument, and I did. She then positioned herself between me and the small knot of people. There was a brief, heated discussion, with the employee shaking his head. Some of it I could hear, and some of it I couldn't, as the man spoke to the other staff member. I heard her briefly again, saying something about ever again. The lady was then actually escorted from the store, leaving her cart behind. I was super surprised by that. When all was said and done, it seemed that the man had seen the whole thing. Things quieted down quickly. The customer who had intervened pointed at me and flashed the OK symbol that most people know, pointer finger to thumb, 3 fingers out. I smiled and nodded. I signed and loudly said, "Thank you," before the Walmart employee led me back to the area to get new bread. I flashed the man the peace sign before I left and signed "Thank you" again before being led away. Edit. Please don't touch people during a pandemic. B, if someone doesn't seem to hear you, put your hand into or step slowly into their line of sight. They may be deaf. C, it was very clear that I didn't work there. Edit 2. I'm adding this as an edit because it'll more easily explain my mistake. I typically carry a reusable mask with me. I have 6 cotton masks with multiple layers and filters in black that I wash and reuse. Today was the one day I did not have one, and yes, I take the blame for that, 100%. I even have mask stretchers that fit my mask on the upper part of my head so as not to interfere with my hearing aids. I was doing laundry last night as my masks are reusable, and I thought for sure I still had one in my purse. Unfortunately, I did not. I would have understood if they had denied me entry to the store because, while it is a full face and full head helmet with a visor and dual shield, it doesn't equate to a mask, and boy, does the visor fog up fast. I made an extra effort to socially distance, and I will definitely be more mindful of checking my purse for a mask in the future instead of assuming I have one in there. Story 3. I am quite short, just under 5 feet, and most of the time, I am quite comfortable with my height. But supermarkets are my bane. All too often, I find things that I need up on the top shelf, right where I maybe can tease them down with my fingertips while standing on my toes if I am lucky. So, usually, I prefer not to risk tipping the whole shelf over and just ask the closest fellow shopper if they can get whatever I need. I have never had any problems. Those who are busy will just ignore me, and those who have a moment will help. But yesterday, I ran into a man who just had to turn it into a huge confrontation. I was looking at a jar of pepper, thinking if I could get it down myself or if I should look for help. He came up right at my side and took a similar jar, so before he moved away, I asked if he could get a second jar for me, please. He immediately exploded, saying I was too dumb and couldn't see that he didn't work there and was just shopping like I was. His rant lasted a couple of minutes, filled with insults and general swearing. I was so glad that I had finally grown a thicker skin because he nearly drove me to tears before I got angry. There was also a heavy dose of stunned disbelief. I can't believe people like that exist outside of stories. Thankfully, another shopper passed by us, and I turned to her, ignoring the still ranting man, and asked if she could get the pepper for me. She did, and I thanked her and turned to leave. I think I heard the man choke mid-rant as I was leaving, but I didn't look back.